On July 2, 1943, the heat shimmered over the Castelvetrano airfield in Sicily as German and Allied aircraft clashed high above the Mediterranean. A German pilot flying a Focke-Wulf 190, one of the Luftwaffe's most feared fighters, never saw the danger coming from above. A P-40 Warhawk dove out of the sun, guns blazing. The roar of machine gun fire filled the air as streams of bullets tore through the German fighter's fuselage. Within seconds, the aircraft was spiraling downward, smoke trailing behind it as it crashed into the Sicilian countryside below. At the controls of the P-40 was First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, a 22-year-old from Brazil, Indiana. His calm voice reported over the radio that he had downed an enemy aircraft. But this was not just another victory in the war. It was a moment that shattered deeply rooted beliefs. Hall had just achieved what many German Luftwaffe officers believed impossible. A black pilot had defeated one of their elite fighter aces in aerial combat. Later that afternoon, a small swastika was painted on the side of Hall's P-40L Warhawk to mark his kill. It would be the first of many symbols of victory for a group of men who would go on to destroy 112 enemy aircraft during the war. The Germans, impressed and bewildered, began calling them Schwarze Vogelmenschen, which translated to black birdmen. In Nazi Germany, the racial ideology classified black people as inferior, incapable of intelligence, bravery, or mastery of modern machinery. Their propaganda claimed that black soldiers were subhuman and lacked the courage to fight. The Nuremberg laws even banned Germans from marrying people of African descent. But over the skies of the Mediterranean, these lies were about to collide with reality. The black pilots trained in Tuskegee, Alabama, known as the Tuskegee Airmen, were about to prove that courage and skill had nothing to do with skin color. In 1943, when German fighter pilots climbed into their cockpits to intercept American bombers, they expected to face the usual opposition, white American pilots with standard training. What they didn't know was that many of the pilots they would soon fight had trained longer and harder than almost anyone else in the U.S. Army Air Forces. These men had overcome endless obstacles. They had been told from the beginning that they would fail, that they weren't good enough, and that the experiment to train black pilots would prove it. But through discipline, determination, and relentless effort, they became some of the most skilled aviators in the entire U.S. military. They flew with a dual mission, one to defend their country, and another to prove that African Americans were just as capable as anyone else. Every mission carried more than bombs or bullets. It carried the weight of an entire race's struggle for equality. As the war went on, the results spoke louder than any prejudice. Over Europe, the Tuskegee Airmen flew more than 15,000 combat sorties and completed 1,578 missions. They destroyed 112 enemy aircraft and protected American bombers with such skill that their loss rate was lower than any other fighter group. Even Nazi officers who believed in racial superiority were forced to confront the truth. Their ideas about race were collapsing under the undeniable evidence of black excellence in combat. The path that led to this historic victory didn't start on the battlefield. It began years earlier in the shadow of segregation and discrimination in America itself. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College published a report titled Employment of Negro Manpower in War. It stated that black men were intellectually inferior to white men, lacked courage, and were unfit for leadership or technical positions. This racist report reflected the official mindset of the American military at the time. But even as these beliefs circulated through the halls of power, a few determined black pioneers were proving them wrong. During World War I, Eugene Bullard had flown for France because the U.S. military refused to let him serve as a pilot. He became one of the first black combat aviators in history. Bessie Coleman, unable to gain admission to any American flight school, traveled to France in 1921 to earn her pilot's license. She became the first African-American woman to do so, paving the way for others to follow. In the 1930s, the Coffey School of Aeronautics in Chicago began training black civilians to fly, showing that flying skill was not limited by race or background. Their success made it harder for the government to keep ignoring black talent. As tensions rose in Europe and war seemed inevitable, civil rights leaders increased their efforts to challenge segregation in the military. Activists like Walter White of the NAACP, labor leader A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie fought tirelessly for the inclusion of black men in military aviation. Black newspapers like the Chicago Defender, Pittsburgh Courier, and Baltimore Afro-American printed articles demanding change. They asked one powerful question. How could the United States claim to fight for democracy abroad while denying it to its own citizens at home? Their campaign gained momentum and finally led to action. On April 3, 1939, Congress passed Public Law 18, which included a small but crucial amendment requiring the Civil Aeronautics Authority to establish at least one flight school for black pilot training. Although the law was a token gesture and still operated within a segregated system, it opened the door to an opportunity that had never existed before. 2 years later, politics helped push progress even further. When Franklin D. Roosevelt sought an unprecedented third term in 1940, he needed the support of black voters in key northern cities. As a result, on January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, the first all-black flying unit in U.S. history. However, the military described it as an experiment, reflecting their doubt about whether black pilots could truly perform in combat. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. was chosen to lead the new squadron. He was the son of Benjamin O. Davis, Sr., the first black general in U.S. Army history. At West Point, Davis, Jr. had endured 4 years of isolation. His white classmates refused to speak to him except during official duties. Yet he graduated in the top 20% of his class and went on to become one of the most respected officers of his generation. When he took command of the 99th Fighter Squadron, he understood the enormous responsibility on his shoulders. He and his men were not only fighting for their country, but also for the respect and recognition of millions of African Americans whose worth had been denied for generations. When the 99th arrived at their base in Farjuna, Tunisia in 1943, they were attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William W. Momier. Momier doubted their abilities and made no effort to hide his prejudice. He assigned them to routine patrols over the Mediterranean, rather than letting them engage in major operations. He believed they would fail, and when they didn't immediately produce spectacular results, he used that as an excuse to justify his low expectations. But the men of the 99th were determined to prove themselves. On June 2, 1943, they were ordered to fly their first combat mission against the Italian-held island of Pantelleria. Their worn-out P-40 Warhawks lifted into the sky, engines roaring as they climbed toward their target. Suddenly, German fighters appeared, slicing through the clouds. The Tuskegee pilots didn't panic or break formation. They stayed together, guarding their bombers with discipline and precision. No planes were lost on either side that day, but the message was clear. The black pilots of the 99th were skilled, professional, and fearless. The Germans had just met opponents who would challenge not only their air power, but also their entire belief system. This first encounter marked the beginning of a new chapter in military history. The Tuskegee Airmen were no longer part of an experiment. They were part of the fight. With every mission, they rewrote the rules of who could be a hero, proving in the skies above Europe and Africa that courage, intelligence, and skill belonged to no single race. The pilots of the 99th Fighter Squadron had already proven that they would not bend under pressure. They faced doubt, discrimination, and impossible odds, yet they continued to fly with courage and professionalism. But July 2, 1943 became the day that changed everything. On that morning, Lieutenant Charles Hall climbed into his Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, preparing for his 8th combat mission. His assignment was to escort a formation of B-25 Mitchell bombers heading toward Castelvetrono airfield in Sicily. The airfield was a key target for Allied forces, heavily defended by German aircraft, including the feared Focke-Wulf 190s. As the bombers reached their target and began their attack run, Hall scanned the sky for threats. Suddenly, he spotted 2 German fighters diving down toward the B-25s. The German planes were fast, powerful, and flown by experienced pilots who specialized in tearing apart bomber formations. Hall later described what happened in calm, steady words as if recounting a routine event, though the truth was far from ordinary. He said he saw 2 Focke-Wulfs following the bombers right after the bombs were dropped. Without hesitation, he turned toward the space between the German fighters and the bombers, cutting into their attack path. Using all his skill, he managed to turn inside one of the enemy planes, giving him a perfect firing angle. He squeezed the trigger and sent a long burst of machine gun fire ripping through the air. Tracers tore into the second enemy aircraft, which tried to bank left, but suddenly lost control and plummeted straight into the ground below. When Hall returned to base, the reaction was explosive. The black ground crews, who had endured months of humiliation and condescension from white personnel, finally had a victory that no one could deny. Cheers echoed across the field as word spread. Lieutenant Charles Hall had just achieved something no black American pilot had ever done before. He had shot down an enemy aircraft in aerial combat. This victory was more than a personal triumph. It was a moment that shattered barriers, silenced critics, and gave pride to every black soldier, mechanic, and officer serving under the Tuskegee banner. Yet even this victory wasn't enough to erase prejudice. By January 1944, the 99th Fighter Squadron had spent 7 grueling months in combat. They had flown dangerous missions, faced enemy fire, and lost men, but still fought bravely. Despite their discipline and dedication, their commanding officer, Colonel William Momier, filed a deeply unfair report. He claimed that the black pilots lacked aggressiveness and recommended that they be removed from combat entirely. His words reached General Henry Hap Arnold, the commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces. Arnold, under pressure from skeptical officers, considered ending what many in the military still called the Tuskegee experiment. But before that decision could be made, the course of history changed again at Anzio. On January 27, 1944, as Allied forces fought to hold their beachhead at Anzio, the Luftwaffe launched massive air attacks against them. The 99th Squadron was sent into the fight with just 15 pilots flying outdated and worn-out P-40 Warhawks. The German planes they faced, the sleek Focke-Wulf 190s, were faster, better armed, and flown by veterans. The odds were completely against them, but the men of the 99th refused to back down. In a furious 2-day battle, they engaged the enemy head-on. The sky over Anzio became a swirling chaos of fire and smoke. Yet through precise teamwork and courage, the 99th shot down multiple German fighters. Reports varied, but somewhere between 8 and 13 enemy planes were destroyed. Charles Hall added 2 more victories to his record, proving that his earlier success had not been luck. In those 2 days, the 99th achieved more aerial victories than they had in all their previous months of combat. Their bravery could no longer be dismissed. The War Department conducted a full review, comparing their performance with that of white P-40 squadrons. The findings were clear. The 99th was performing at the same level as other units, and in some cases even better. The victory at Anzio silenced many doubters and proved that black pilots could match anyone in the air. Their success paved the way for a new chapter. In May 1944, the 302nd Fighter Group was formed, uniting the 99th with 3 other black squadrons, the 100th, 301st, and 302nd. This new unit was given one of the most demanding and dangerous roles in the war, escorting bombers deep into Nazi territory. These were long missions over heavily defended areas, where hundreds of German fighters waited to destroy American bombers. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., their commander, understood the importance of the mission. At Ramatelli Airfield, located on Italy's Adriatic coast, he gathered his men and spoke with calm authority. He told them that their job was not to chase personal glory or rack up enemy kills. Their mission was to bring the bombers home safely, no matter what it took. Every pilot understood what he meant. The Red Tail's first duty was protection, not fame. In June 1944, General Nathan Twining introduced a color coding system to help identify fighter groups during missions. Each group received distinctive markings. The 382nd was given the color red, but instead of just red stripes or noses, their entire tail sections were painted bright crimson. Their P-51 Mustangs, shining silver with red tails, red spinners, and red nose bands, became unmistakable in the sky. These aircraft earned them their famous nickname, the Red Tails. At first, bomber crews didn't know who their new escorts were. They didn't know that the men flying those gleaming red planes were black. What they did notice, however, was that these fighters never abandoned them. While other escort groups sometimes broke formation to chase personal victories, the Red Tails stayed close, shielding the bombers all the way to their targets and back. Word began to spread among the bomber crews. They started asking for them by name. Request the Red Tails if you can get them. Their commitment was tested on July 18, 1944. Colonel Davis led 66 Mustangs to rendezvous with bombers heading toward Memmingen, Germany, to attack a Luftwaffe base. The mission quickly became one of their most dangerous. The bombers arrived late, leaving the fighters waiting in enemy airspace. Davis made the bold choice to stay and wait rather than return to base. It was a risky decision, as fuel was limited and German fighters could attack at any moment. When the bombers finally appeared, so did nearly 100 German aircraft. The enemy struck from several directions in a coordinated ambush. The Red Tails met the attack head-on. The sky erupted with gunfire as P-51s and Messerschmitts clashed in furious dogfights. Despite being outnumbered, the 302nd fought fiercely, claiming up to a dozen German kills. But the cost was heavy. 15 B-17 bombers were shot down in just 20 minutes, and 3 Red Tail pilots, Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown, were killed in action. Critics back home were quick to use the losses as proof that black pilots couldn't handle large-scale air battles. But a later operational analysis told the real story. The 302nd had arrived in the middle of a massive German assault, already in progress, and their intervention had saved many more bombers from destruction. Their courage under impossible conditions had prevented total disaster. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was struggling to survive. Allied air power dominated the skies. But Germany still had one last weapon, the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It was a revolutionary aircraft, faster than anything the Allies could field, capable of speeds over 540 miles per hour. Many Allied pilots had never even seen one before they were attacked by it. On March 24, 1945, the Red Tails were assigned their most difficult mission yet. They were to escort bombers on a 1,600-mile round trip to Berlin, targeting the Daimler-Benz tank factory. Intelligence reports warned that German jets from Jagdgeschwader 7 would defend the area. Colonel Davis led 43 P-51 Mustangs into enemy territory, fully aware that this could be their hardest fight. As they neared Berlin, silver streaks cut across the sky. The Me-262s had arrived. It was the largest group of jets ever deployed in a single mission. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown had studied the jets' strengths and weaknesses. He knew they were faster, but he also knew they were vulnerable when turning or climbing. Instead of chasing them directly, he and his fellow pilots used clever tactics, diving away and then looping back into the jet's blind spots. Brown fired 3 precise bursts at one Me-262 and saw the pilot bail out as the aircraft broke apart in midair. Lieutenant Earl Lane pulled off an incredible feat, shooting down another jet with a long-range 2,000-yard deflection shot using the new K-14 gun sight. Lieutenant Charles Brantley claimed a third victory that day. In that single mission, the Red Tails destroyed more Me-262s than most Allied units managed during the entire war. The 332nd Fighter Group earned a Distinguished Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism. Their reputation as disciplined, fearless protectors was now legendary. But not every mission ended in triumph. 32 Tuskegee Airmen were captured and became prisoners of war. Some faced harsh treatment, while others encountered unexpected moments of respect from German officers who, despite their country's racist ideology, recognized their bravery as fellow aviators. These experiences revealed the contradictions of Nazi beliefs and showed that even in the midst of hatred and war, courage and humanity could still be seen. By the end of the war, the Red Tails had forever changed military history. They had proven, through skill and sacrifice, that courage, discipline, and excellence were not defined by race. They fought not only for victory in the skies, but also for the honor and equality of an entire people. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson's 19th mission began as a routine operation, but turned into a defining moment in his life. On August 12, 1944, he was flying his P-51 Mustang over southern France, leading an attack on German radar stations that guided anti-aircraft defenses and night fighters. During the low-altitude strafing run, his aircraft was suddenly hit by concentrated flak. Shrapnel tore through the fuselage, and the powerful Mustang began to lose altitude rapidly. Jefferson managed to control the descent for a short while, but smoke filled the cockpit and the engine failed. He bailed out, parachuting into enemy territory, where he was soon captured by German soldiers. Once in German custody, Jefferson was taken to an interrogation center where he was shocked by the precision and depth of the enemy's intelligence. The German officer questioning him displayed remarkable familiarity with the operations of the 392nd Fighter Group. Jefferson later recalled that the interrogator mentioned the group's base at Ramitelli Airfield in Italy, named the squadron commanders, and even recited personal details about Jefferson's life back home. The officer knew his father's occupation as a schoolteacher, his mother's maiden name, and the neighborhood where his family lived in Detroit. For Jefferson, the interrogation was an eerie and unsettling experience, revealing how thoroughly the Germans had studied their opponents. After the questioning, Jefferson was sent to Stalag Luft III, a large prisoner of war camp for Allied airmen in what is now Poland. There he met hundreds of captured pilots and crewmen from different Allied nations. To his surprise, he was treated with the same respect and conditions as the white officers imprisoned with him. In the rigidly segregated America he came from, this would have been impossible. In the camp, white airmen who had once flown with or been escorted by the Red Tails often approached him with gratitude, recalling how his unit had saved their bombers from destruction. These encounters offered Jefferson a strange and painful reflection. Inside a Nazi camp, he was treated more as an equal than he ever had been in the country he served. As the months dragged on, life inside Stalag Luft III became a routine of endurance. Prisoners exchanged stories, built friendships, and dreamed of freedom. Jefferson and his fellow prisoners listened to rumors of the advancing Soviet armies and the slow collapse of Hitler's empire. When liberation finally came, Jefferson returned to the United States with pride in his service but also bitterness. At the port where American soldiers disembarked, segregation was still enforced. The black airmen who had fought to protect freedom in Europe were separated from the white troops they had served beside. The injustice was a harsh reminder that the war for equality was far from over. Even so, the legend of the Red Tails had already begun to take root. German pilots who once dismissed the idea of black aviators as propaganda grudgingly acknowledged their skill with the nickname Schwarze Vogelmenschen, or Black Birdmen. Among the Allied bomber crews, the respect was even deeper. To the men who flew the long, deadly missions over Europe, the color of their escort skin meant nothing. They cared only that the Red Tails stayed with them through the worst battles, never abandoning their bombers even when enemy fighters appeared in overwhelming numbers. These bomber crews told stories of the Red Tails' discipline and precision, the way they flew tight formations, the way they waggled their wings in greeting, and the way they refused to leave a damaged bomber unprotected. Soon, the Red Tails became known as guardian angels of the sky. Bomber crews would quietly pass the word before missions, saying, "If you can get the Red Tails, you'll come home." The statistics proved those words true. Studies by Air Force historian Dr. Daniel Hallman showed that bombers escorted by the 332nd Fighter Group lost only 27 aircraft to enemy fighters, while bombers protected by other P-51 groups lost an average of 46. Despite flying some of the longest and most hazardous routes into Germany, the Red Tails achieved one of the best protection records in the entire war. Their achievements were the result of relentless training and unmatched determination. The Tuskegee Airmen flew 1,578 combat missions and more than 15,000 individual sorties. They provided escort on 179 missions for heavy bombers, including 301 operations under the 15th Air Force. They destroyed 112 enemy aircraft in dogfights and another 150 on the ground. On March 24, 1945, they accomplished one of their most impressive victories, shooting down 3 Me-262 jet fighters, the fastest aircraft in the world at that time, in a single mission over Germany. They also destroyed over 950 locomotives, trucks, and rail cars, and inflicted heavy damage on enemy shipping, including crippling the Italian destroyer TA-22 in June 1944. Their performance was exceptional by every measure. They maintained a lower bomber loss rate than any other escort group in their Air Force. Individual pilots stood out as heroes in their own right. Lee Archer earned 4 confirmed kills, one short of the number required to be officially labeled an ace, though many believed he actually achieved that 5th victory. Joseph Ellsbury downed 4 enemy planes, including 3 Focke-Wulf 190s in a single mission. Edward Toppin scored 4 aerial victories, and Clarence Lester destroyed 3 German fighters in 1 day of combat. The unit's accomplishments earned them a long list of awards and honors. Tuskegee Airmen received 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 744 Air Medals, 14 Bronze Stars, and 8 Purple Hearts. The 99th Fighter Squadron was awarded 3 Distinguished Unit Citations, and the 392nd Fighter Group as a whole earned one for extraordinary heroism in action. However, these achievements came with a heavy price. 66 pilots were killed in action, 32 were captured as prisoners of war, and 84 others died during training or non-combat missions. Their excellence was not an accident. At Tuskegee, every pilot was trained under some of the toughest standards in the military. On average, they flew 300 hours of training. far more than the 200 hours required for white pilots. Their instructors emphasized discipline, teamwork, and formation flying. Every maneuver had to be perfect because in combat, precision meant survival. The washout rate was brutally high. 6 out of 10 trainees failed to complete the program, compared to 4 out of 10 in white flight schools. This meant that only the most determined, intelligent, and skilled cadets earned their wings. Colonel Noel Parrish, the white officer who commanded the Tuskegee training base, later described them as a super-selected group of men who had proven themselves against every obstacle. The aircraft they flew told the story of their rise. When they first went into combat, they were given P-40 Warhawks, sturdy but outdated fighters that were already being phased out elsewhere. The German Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s easily outperformed the Warhawks in speed, climb rate, and weapon power. Yet, the Tuskegee pilots learned to exploit the P-40's few advantages: its strength, stability, and ability to turn sharply. With superior tactics and teamwork, they managed to hold their own against better-equipped enemies. Everything changed when the Red Tails received the P-51 Mustang in 1944. The P-51 was one of the most advanced fighters of the war, capable of flying at over 430 miles per hour and escorting bombers deep into the heart of Germany, thanks to its long-range fuel tanks. It carried 650 caliber machine guns and could destroy nearly any target in the air or on the ground. With this aircraft, the Tuskegee Airmen could finally show the full extent of their abilities. The bright red tails painted on their planes soon became a symbol of both power and protection. But behind every pilot stood a large team of support personnel who rarely received public recognition. Mechanics, armorers, crew chiefs, and radio technicians worked tirelessly to keep the aircraft in perfect condition. In the cold mud and exhaustion of wartime Italy, these men labored day and night to ensure the Red Tails could take off on schedule. Out of nearly 16,000 Tuskegee Airmen who served, fewer than 1,000 were pilots. The rest played vital roles that made every mission possible. By the end of the war, the Red Tails had done more than prove their courage. They had dismantled a deeply rooted system of prejudice. Before the war, official military reports had claimed that black men lacked the intelligence and discipline for technical or leadership roles. The Tuskegee Airmen proved that wrong beyond question. Through skill, sacrifice, and unity, they showed that excellence had no color. Their story became a turning point in both military history and the broader struggle for civil rights, a legacy that would continue long after the final dogfight was over. The men who worked on the ground were the quiet heroes who made every victory possible. The ground crews at Ramatelli Airfield in Italy worked wonders despite having very limited supplies and outdated facilities. Their base was far from the comfort and efficiency of other American airfields, yet they kept the planes flying with incredible determination. Spare parts were often hard to find, and the 332nd Fighter Group was usually last in line for needed equipment. Even with those disadvantages, their rate of aircraft readiness was just as high, and sometimes even higher, than that of better-equipped white units. These men didn't just maintain planes. They often found themselves in danger too. German bombing raids on Ramatelli were rare but deadly. During one such attack on March 24, 1944, several support personnel were killed. Still, the crews kept working through the chaos, moving aircraft away from burning fuel dumps and saving as many planes as possible from destruction. The strategic bombing campaign across Europe tested every aspect of the Tuskegee Airmen's skill and courage. Each B-17 Flying Fortress represented a massive investment, both in money and manpower, costing over $200,000 and carrying 10 well-trained crew members. Losing one bomber meant more than losing a plane. It was a blow to the entire war effort. That's why escorting and protecting these bombers mattered even more than shooting down enemy fighters. Colonel Benjamin Davis made this clear when he told his pilots that anyone could chase and destroy an enemy plane, but it took real discipline to stay with the bombers even when the enemy tried to lure them away. Over time, the Red Tails perfected a powerful escort system built on teamwork and precision. They flew in 3 protective layers. The closest group flew directly above the bombers, weaving to guard them closely. The medium escort positioned themselves to cut off any incoming German fighters, and the highest group watched from above to stop diving attacks. This system demanded perfect coordination and absolute focus. The Tuskegee Airmen were not only fighting the German Luftwaffe, they were also battling racism and prejudice from their own country. Their skill and success shattered both Nazi racial myths and American segregationist ideas, proving that courage and talent had nothing to do with skin color. Back home, however, things were very different. While the Tuskegee Airmen's victories made headlines in black newspapers, the mainstream press often ignored or downplayed their achievements. The Pittsburgh Courier's WWII campaign, calling for victory against fascism abroad and racism at home, proudly highlighted the Tuskegee Airmen as examples of true American heroism. Ironically, by the end of the war, even the Germans knew who the Red Tails were. The Luftwaffe reportedly called them the Schwarze-Vogelmenschen, or Black Birdmen. Yet many white Americans still didn't know that black pilots existed, largely because the War Department failed to publicize their success stories. When victory in Europe finally came, the Tuskegee Airmen faced uncertainty instead of celebration. While white fighter groups prepared for parades and honors, the 332nd was left wondering about their future. The U.S. Army Air Forces still planned to maintain segregation despite all the evidence proving its unfairness. For decades after the war, the Tuskegee Airmen's accomplishments were almost forgotten by mainstream America. Many of the pilots carried this disappointment quietly. Lee Archer, one of their most successful aces with 4 confirmed kills, worked in business after the war but rarely talked about his service because, as he said, people simply didn't believe a black man could have been a fighter ace. Change finally came in 1948 when President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, which officially integrated the U.S. military. This decision was directly influenced by the Tuskegee Airmen's outstanding combat record. Benjamin Davis, who had led the Red Tails over Berlin, went on to become the first black general in the U.S. Air Force in 1954. Recognition took time, but it did come. In 2007, President George W. Bush presented the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen. Only about 300 of the original pilots were still alive to attend the ceremony, many of them waiting more than 60 years to finally be honored by their country. The respect they earned wasn't built on myths, but on hard facts. They destroyed 112 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, 3 German jet fighters in one mission, and 150 aircraft on the ground. They lost fewer bombers than any other escort group, just 27 compared to an average of 46. They earned 96 distinguished flying crosses among countless other medals. The name the Germans gave them, the Black Birdmen, became a symbol of their unmatched skill and bravery. Every bomber they protected, and every enemy plane they destroyed added proof to their legacy that ability knows no color. Roscoe Brown, one of the pilots who shot down a German jet over Berlin, summed it up best when he said they didn't just fight the Germans, they fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred, and they won all 3 battles. The Tuskegee Airmen didn't just win a war, they changed history itself. They defeated their enemies in the air, they destroyed racist ideology through undeniable performance, and they paved the way for a more equal America through their courage and excellence. When given the chance to prove themselves, they soared higher than anyone could have imagined, turning mockery into respect, prejudice into understanding, and doubt into lasting honor.